identificar quais são esses produtos, essas áreas que mais estratégicas para a diversificação. De certa forma, é muito parecido com o que o Banco Mundial agora, bem recentemente, tem proposto em papers bem recentes do economista-chefe do Banco Mundial, que propõe que os países deem uma olhada nos países mais desenvolvidos e emulem essa produção dos países mais desenvolvidos com a produção dos produtos que já estão mais tradicionais desses países mais desenvolvidos. O que a gente está fazendo aqui, de certa forma, é similar. O que a gente diz é que os países também devem emular essa produção de países mais desenvolvidos, mas o que a gente chama de países com capacidades produtivas maiores. E o que a gente sugere é que esses países emulem a capacidade produtiva dos países que estão acima do nível deles, mas não muito acima, e emulem os produtos mais sofisticados desses países. Então, é uma diversificação mais estratégica. O segundo passo dessa estratégia é a seleção desses planos de negócio, dessas estratégias de negócio que foram mais bem-sucedidas. E quando a gente fala em uma seleção, a gente sempre está relacionando um juiz, um critério de julgamento, e o que a gente fala é que seria o mais importante deixar para o mercado julgar quais são esses planos de negócio que foram mais sucedidos para a diversificação. E o terceiro passo seria a amplificação desse plano, desses negócios que foram bem-sucedidos, né? Seria a exploração dessa nova vantagem comparativa que foi descoberta. Então, de certa forma, muito parecido, uma mensagem de vantagem comparativa dinâmica, né? Uma busca dinâmica de vantagem comparativa, tentando upgrade, e também uma mensagem um pouco com o Flying Geese Pattern, né? Desenvolvimento, emulando a produção de países que têm uma vantagem comparativa maior.
But since when I launched your report, I had to speak exclusively in favor of it. I haven't had a chance to actually share some of my questions and concerns with you. It's a privilege because I'm an Asian in Brazil, so I get some perspective. I have some technical questions, and then I have a concern, which is, my technical question is with your formula. It's a simple divisor. You just divide one by the other, yeah? Then, as you know, that means you're assigning equal weights to each element in the formula. Unless you show empirically otherwise, a small change in the weights would radically change the relative position of countries with respect to productive capacity. And that would be a major weakness because the formula has to be robust weights. So this struck me when I read your report, and I'm still concerned. It would be good if you could come back on that. You just mentioned my second concern is 2A and 2B. With the least developed countries, you mentioned Tuvalu, and you compared it with the Central African Republic. Now, as we know, these three countries that you talk about, Guam, Central African Republic, what's the third one?
Grenada.
I'm sorry? Grenada. These are not exactly development successes. The first is a basket case, and has been a basket case for 25 years. Tuvalu is beset with something that the report completely ignores, which is actually, I would sort of submit to you, the one thing that binds Asian LDCs together, environmental risk. Mm-hmm. Every single LDC in Asia Pacific, every single LDC is in a high category environmental public good producing place. To talk about productive capacity in that specific Asian context that you're charged with UNESCAP without actually bringing this in seems to me risible, to put it politely. That this does not come into analysis. And I'm curious why, in this entire discussion, that doesn't come in. I mean, of course, that highlights the larger issue, that small LDCs are extremely risky LDCs, and therefore exogenous shocks, systemic shocks, can make the number of diversified commodities entirely irrelevant. So to make this kind of comparison, saying that Tuvalu can do it because CAR did it, I think is invidious, and I'll be very careful. So those are my major concerns. I think I've expressed them in a much shorter way than I normally would, which is good. I'll come to my technical question. These are technical points. My non-technical point, and frankly my biggest concern with the report, is the bit on macroeconomics. What is the report saying? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In the sense that if I am the president of Cambodia, I'm being asked to do South-South regional and triangular cooperation. I'm doing that. I'm being asked to follow prudent macroeconomic policies. I'm doing that. I'm being asked to do many things which I'm already doing. I'm being told to pay more attention to trade integration. And that's a good thing in the chapter, and I think that's the one redeeming feature in the report. But the report does not actually make a statement like, to increase productive capacities, the way the IMF must calculate debt sustainability over a horizon must be different from it is now. So therefore this becomes, because of the macroeconomic chapter, and please convey this, I know you're not responsible for the chapter, to your chief economist, this becomes just another report. Which is unfortunate, because I think the analysis you've done here on productive capacity actually opens a window to make the argument, which is now gathering currency in the G20 in the crisis, that the way we assess a country's fiscal sustainability, its monetary policies, and the space it needs to be able to do these things has got to change. I have one final concern. Your report again advocates for more aid to build infrastructure. I don't understand. I've never understood this argument. You can import the steel and the machinery to build infrastructure, highways, roads, ports. How are you going to buy non-tradables with this aid? If you're going to buy non-tradables with this aid, it's a macroeconomic point, it's a macroeconomic division, so I'm putting this question to you, I wouldn't otherwise. You will need to increase domestic money supply. And that will have macroeconomic consequences, including an increase in exchange rate, and therefore a reduction in ability to export precisely the diversified goods you're asking for. Now, this is not an insoluble problem, but it's quite surprising the report doesn't talk about it.
So, is the simple formula without weight. So I think that what's happened is that for these first measures of diversification, they are directly associated with the increase of productive capacity. So a higher diversification implies a higher productive capacity. A higher number of average of products produced by countries that produce a similar product mix is also directly related to the increase in productive capacity. So if we think about what we can think about is like, think about a regression where you have the productive capacity as a dependent variable and all the other terms as independent variables. And what we are trying to capture here is that relation, right? We are not, it's only what is directly influenced the increase or inverted that influencing the increase. So that's the idea. The thing is that when we have the change in the weights, we will have a change on the graphs. So that's why we use the distribution to try to capture how we don't present the actual number that we come up with this formula. What we present is that what is the relation of the country to the average in terms of distance using the standard deviation. So with that we capture what we are trying to see is only how is the distribution. If we may have a different shape or a different spread, but the shape will be similar with the weights. Another way to think about it is that if you use a principal component analysis to come up with certain weights, we have used the principal component analysis to get from the data what would be the weights, and the result that we get at the end is exactly the same result with that. So when we try to get the weights from the data itself, we also get the same results because we always measure to the mean using the standard deviation. How to compare with others, right, is totally true in terms of the comparison that we were trying to make here when we compare Bhutan with Grenada and with others. It's only in terms of diversification. It's only to say, look, to reach a level of diversification that will allow you to increase your productive capacity, you don't need to increase to the level of Vietnam or, you know, to make this big leap. You can increase your diversification to levels of countries that are not in good shape at all. but they are able to produce that number of products. So that's the idea.
Didn't really hear much, and I didn't read the report, so I say this with a caveat, about some of the structural factors that will govern and condition what countries can do, when they can do it, how they do it, and the speed at which they can do it. And it strikes me that the group of countries at the bottom, which are largely SIDS, also are working within a post-conflict context, which govern the capacity, the types of products, the kind of aid they get, where that aid is generated, if they can use it for trade, and a lot of other things that are bottled up in there. So I wonder, how do those factors condition their capacity to take the China leap, or to maybe take an Indonesia leap? I mean, there's also an issue of risk spread and risk absorption capacity. Clearly, Indonesia and the Philippines and Bangladesh also share some commonalities with the SIDS there, but their capacity to spread that risk is going to be more significant than a Tuvalu. So the ability for Tuvalu to take some risk and invest today for tomorrow is going to be a lot less, I think, than for Bangladesh and the Philippines, who may also be anchored into other smaller networks, particularly in ASEAN and within, East and Northern Asia. So I think those are also some issues that perhaps need to come out a little bit more clearly. But for me, certainly the post-conflict context, I would have expected to hear more on that. For Cambodia, Myanmar, Lao PDR, Timor-Leste, those are huge issues, and Solomon Islands as well. Particularly for Timor-Leste, who's also now coming out into a possibly mineral-dependent context, where oil will drive their economy. How will that go when you're talking about a country that spent many years in conflict, has huge amounts of displaced persons, and has a huge capacity gap in terms of institutional frameworks? So then how do they take the opportunity, but also then make that leap and start to build the steps? And then my last point is just about the issue of environmental risk, which Ratan raised, and how that conditions the possibilities, and how those countries will begin to grapple with some of those. Is part of the recommendation for integration at a regional level also going to be about risk sharing and the socialization of risk? For example, the Caribbean has done that to a certain extent through the CRIF, which is the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility. So in the context of looking at Asia Pacific as a region, and as a region that perhaps wants to move forward as a group, is part of the recommendation also going to be about risk sharing and not just risk transfer? Right now, clearly, generally at a macro level, we know that the risk transfer is largely, the liability is at the government end, even though the investments tend to be in the private sector. So is that risk sharing modality also going to be something that could perhaps help some of these countries at the bottom who face political risk as well as environmental risk, and therefore are in a different position in terms of what they can do when they can do it?
In terms of other factors like the risk of natural disasters and other things, as we have not covered many other things, for instance, we could have covered more in terms of employment, the relation of productive employment and other things. It's more a question of limitation in terms of what you have to say and the space that you have. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that this is not the only product of UNESCAP, right? We have a division that deals with disaster risk reduction. And at the same time that we were launching this report, we were launching the Asia Pacific Disaster Report. And in that report, I'm very familiar because I also contribute to that report. And in that report, we show that the risk of impact, of socioeconomic impact of natural disasters caused by natural hazards has increased much more in LDCs, in least developed countries, than in other countries. In terms of aid to infrastructure, perhaps it's not the way that it's read here, or the way that it's perceived here, but the idea was to say the countries, they should have more voice on where they use the aid that they receive. And they should take that back to the hard interventions to the infrastructure, not only to stay in building capacity, in taking to the better governance, but that's the idea on the aid for infrastructure.